Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Michael Morris. Michael is an architect and 4 times NASA X-Hab recipient. He is the founder of Morrissato Studio and of Search Plus, an architecture firm focused on space exploration, which has been the winner of 6 NASA Centennial Challenge competitions. Michael, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here and to be participating with such a luminous group of previous interviews that you've had. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the kind words. Really appreciate it. Michael, before we get into the fascinating work that you are working right now, could you share with us 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
Well, I gave it some thought, and I actually looked at some of your previous uh, speakers, and I thought, what are the 3 words that mean something to me? So I was hoping also to be a bit unique, but I think a lot of us want to say the same thing. But I would say my 3 words are intuitive, collaborative, and regenerative. So those are sort of the 3 words that I live by.
Now, collaborative comes often, but intuitive. Tell me more about why intuitive?
Well, for me, intuition is the root of all creativity. I mean, it's really the driving force of, it comes, I guess, from our haptic knowledge as that we received as children, that somehow creative thinkers retain throughout their lives. And I think, simply put, it's it's somehow privileging the physical, or let's say the hand, equal or over the head. So I think that these kind of ideas of being rooted in physical experiences as a gateway to discovery is somehow inseparable from our thoughts. So I would say that intuition is the combination of those 2 things that's critical to designing architectural space.
I love how the concept of space keeps expanding and with these words. That's always my mission with these 3 words is because I want to really kind of transition the idea of space as more of a set of values and sort of characteristics that it gives us other than this kind of place. Because, space is more than just the blackness that is above us, but it's a frontier, it's dreams, it's the next big phase of the human experience. So if we can transition the narrative, then it kind of brings us together as opposed to dividing us. Um, Michael, there is, and obviously there's an architecture story of going to space. There's a science, technology, there's the economics of it, but beyond that, if I ask you what is the human story, what what does it mean for you? What is the human story of going to space?
Well, I think it's sort of rooted in my other 2 words: is collaboration and regeneration. Because I think that the future is not so much about sustaining life on Earth or to move to another planet to sustain human life, but it's actually in the conflation of those 2 words, is to collaborate with all forms of life, and maybe even uh, in other forms of intelligence, artificial intelligence, or mathematical intelligence, to live there. I mean, we're going to we need to, I think, move. We're sort of humanists, but I think we're going to move towards a sort of post-human existence in space. And I think that is also going to serve to regenerate life in perhaps a different way, but it's also going to regenerate life that we know on Earth, because we're gonna find new ways. We're gonna look for new ways to restore, and I think that's a very healing aspect. So I was struggling with healing being one of my words, but I think that we're looking to heal. the planet, and we're looking to heal ourselves, and we're looking, I think, perhaps to become more equitable with other life forms. So I think that space is not only this huge level of discovery of the beyond, but it's also a huge discovery point of looking within ourselves, and that's a kind of a dialectic between the internal and the external. That is very much also part of architecture.
That's very much the case of what traveling and exploring new places is. It's, as much as we think it's a journey outward, it ends up being a journey inward. And when we went to space for the first time, we ended up actually getting more appreciation towards the Earth with the famous, the photo of the blue planet from the moon. So yeah, going to space will create even more value of the planets and Earth beyond. Now, Michael, I want to ask you a question. I feel that in the world of architecture, there's been a certain arc of what motivates or where we are in architecture. At the beginning, architecture or the buildings that we created were more derived from the limits or the environment around, so nature. So nature kind of dictated what we could and could not do. Then after that, we went into an era of creating things that defied nature, right? Where like, doesn't matter what nature is, I'm gonna create these things, and it's more about proving something or the aesthetic. But now I feel that we're getting into a new era where we're kind of balancing these two essence. So we want to work within the framework of nature, but we also want to go beyond nature. We understand the human element, our relationship with buildings, with these structures around us. We understand the environment and where we are, but at the same time, we have to go beyond. Am I correct in this?
Well, I think that, with the advent of astrobiology, for instance, we're changing our view of what nature is. So I think that people are still, what is that? What does that mean? What are the discoveries there? I think it's interesting. I can't remember her name, but she's a well-regarded astrobiologist. I believe that she's Turkish. And I once heard her speak about how she approaches thinking about life form and nature. And she started talking that science needed to be more lateral thinkers. Well, this is something very common to the training of an architect. We're very lateral in our thinking and our approach. So the sort of combination, as you say, between, let's say, the functional or the pragmatic and the aspirational is very much part of the sort of balance that we're seeking in our lateral approach. We need to provide efficient and essential shelter or functional spaces for things to exist in, but we also need to make them. It's every generation to regenerate that generation, and so to speak. We need to make it anew. We need to make things that are aspirational and inspirational for people as well. So I think it's really defining that balance of, and that's sort of following the intuition angle again, is to understand what is possible today, but at the same time, like through that sort of visionary approach, to begin to think about, well, what does the future look like? How can we move into that space? And how can we celebrate it in this like very holistic way of thinking? And I guess that's what we sort of do as architects is bring that thinking into the mix. Whereas sometimes the sort of NASA or the sort of scientific approach is very abstracting and isolating, and we're trying to look at the whole picture at the same time. So it's an interesting position to be in, while respecting the incredible science and engineering and what is needed to be done, which is beyond our pay grade. we're the people who are sort of ask really good, dumb questions, or we're at level zero, we can bring it back to the beginning. And I think that that's critical to any creative process, is to go back to the like Zen proverb of going back to the beginner's mind. And each and every problem that we do, we struggle to go back to the beginner's mind so that we can look at each question completely anew. And that's critical, I think, for any creative person, and particularly for architects.
Absolutely, totally agree there. Um, was space always this place of interest for you, or you ended up kind of stumbling, out of just the randomness of life, as you started as an architect, and then suddenly here you are, kind of a four-time NASA recipient, and your firm is totally focused now on space exploration. Was that always there, or was it a newfound interest?
Thank you for asking. It's a very long story. I've told it before a couple of times, but it's twofold. One of them is that although my parents are Irish, I was born in London. We moved to the United States, and my father joined the American Air Force, ultimately becoming a major in the U.S. Air Force. And for some reason, it was the golden age of Apollo. So I obviously, as a child, saw the man walk on the moon on TV. We got I don't remember if it was a school day or a not day, but I remember exactly where I was at that time, watching this fuzzy black and white TV, and staring at it all day. I think it was something that really joined the entire Earth at that time. It was an incredible, phenomenal event for all mankind to witness that. And I mean, hopefully we're on the cusp of doing that again. But I would say also that growing up in the 1970s, or having my formative years in the 1970s, was two things. Was the falling at the end of the beginning of the 70s was the end of the Apollo missions. And then you have the sort of first significant environmental movement. So I think that those two situations combined, like both the awareness of space and the recognition of Earth as this sort of fragile blue marble that you mentioned, were very key part of the zeitgeist of growing up in the 1970s. And then as a pop cultural person, my hero was David Bowie. So Bowie's fascination with space was also became a kind of an artistic aesthetic for me, in addition to some other rock stars who also use space as their monkey or sort of touchstone. So I was really attracted to that, both technologically as well as aesthetically.
Now, did you? I mean, so we live in an era now where space is actually becoming a possibility. The idea of living on the moon or living on Mars is not just science fiction, it is a possibility. Did you think that you would get to live in a time where the science fiction or just the pure interest of space as this, you know, world of imagination would become part of your job now, to design, to work, to really build a team, to really now achieve this transition from the science fiction to the reality?
Well, both me and my late wife, Yoshiko Sato, who started Search, actually, we both had this idea when we graduated from architecture school, and more so Yoshiko, of doing her thesis on the moon. And then when she discovered that she had life-threatening cancer, she decided that she would live her thesis. We would kind of refocus our terrestrial practice, architectural practice, and really go back to our dreams of our thesis, which was to look at space and space architecture. And it was done through Columbia University, the graduate architecture program there, and we got a little bit of pushback because they thought that the space aesthetic, the space in architectural avant-garde was already exhausted, and they didn't see new ways of being or occupying space. But Yoshiko and some degree myself, we said, no, this is going to be different this time. So we got, we developed a whole group of graduate students who many of them became our partners. And through that, we built a kind of basically a groundswell of interest, which was emerging at the time. We did not know that, this sort of space economy or this space obsession that we have today. When we look back at 2006, that was not there. It was not part of the sort of cultural ethos or interest for anything. And then it sort of slowly emerged. And so we were sort of there, so to speak, at the right time when the NASA competitions started happening, and we entered them. And through that, we applied a lot of our research and our enthusiasm for space. So I would say that it was both, it had sort of existed, and then it was opportune moment to enter these competitions and ultimately win them. So because of the alternative approach that we had to thinking about space architecture, which was not to invent what already exists, but to try to build off of that science and in particularly talk to planetary scientists, geologists, and stuff, so we could learn how to rethink building out of materials that we would find on the moon and Mars, so that we would also sort of fulfill that sustainability idea that we need to develop those techniques with local materials rather than offsetting the cost of bringing that mass with you. So that was a very interesting problem, in a sense. To the problem invited us to start over. And so what an opportunity as an architect to really think about the question of, starting over, and could we get it right this time? Could we make better decisions? And could we perhaps even build things that leave no trace? Was our first impetus. So like, how do we go to these planets? How do we celebrate them? How do we explore them? But perhaps how do we leave no trace was an important aspect, because obviously we don't want to go all the way to Mars to discover life, to discover it was our own tracings of bacteria left there. So I think it's key to human exploration.
There's a lot of people that feel that going to space is much more difficult than what we've encountered in the past. I tend to believe that space is just kind of a challenge that is proportionally equal to our capacity to solve the problem. If we look back into the 1500s, the notion of crossing an ocean was more dangerous than us going to space. There were thousands of people who perished in the process of migrating or embarking on an ocean journey, only to discover that they would not survive in the end. Do you think that this next phase of building on the moon, building on Mars, building in orbit, a space station, is really more complicated, or is just that now it's our new boundaries of trying to achieve the impossible?
Well, I like the sort of 15. Sorry, that was an echo. I like the sort of 15th century reference there, because I often refer to what we're doing is akin to building a medieval cathedral, architecturally, because it requires going back to that word collaboration, it requires a lot of collaboration. Some of those collaborators will become known and unknown to us in history and society. And it requires a kind of a comprehensive collaboration to do the impossible, because it really is that difficult. It's at the level of impossible. And that's what's great about, the NASA dictum to make the impossible possible. to make it real. It's incredibly dangerous, as was building a Gothic cathedral. But I think it's perhaps more akin to like somebody like Antonio Gaudí, who built the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and it was a visionary project that was seen by him, and obviously started at the beginning of his career when he was in his early 20s, but obviously not completed until it's not even probably fully completed, but until recently was consecrated. So long after his life. So I think that's also the very important thing, that it's not just, collaboration is not just what we do together today. It's also a multi-generational project. And I think that's really the interest to me, is like, wow, I can work on something that's not only just what I can do here and now, but that I can contribute to something that is, hopefully, I can contribute in a meaningful way to something that's hopefully multi-generational. And I think that's a general, maybe a cognizant idea, that when we think about space, we need to reframe ourselves in terms of the satisfaction of the immediate, and look at it and say, yes, this is a very difficult, treacherous problem, but collectively we can accomplish this. I think the ISS, International Space Station, was a 21st century example of a cathedral building. It was magnificent. We didn't celebrate it, perhaps the architecture as perhaps as much as we could have, because I think it became very monotonous in the way that it was oftentimes presented. So I think that that's also a very important role that we play anyway, to make it interesting. Our architecture is oftentimes aspirational in its projection, because we're trying to pull technology forward, but we're also trying to say, when we go to these spaces, we don't have to live in a cave, we don't have to live in a bunker. You can actually live in a structure that potentially celebrates being where you are, even if you can't go outside. So I think that those are things that, that will help people to thrive in these environments, well beyond just simply surviving. So it's a big, lofty goal, and we want to challenge it even further. But I think that we have to aim high. We have to, aim higher than just proficiency in some way. We have to. Just think of the pressure, how important it is for the first person to build something, out of Martian or lunar regolith as a structure on those planets. I think that would be an enormous amount of pressure to get that right, and to also do something hopefully incredible with it.
Now, how much do you think would be, because now we're in an era where artificial intelligence, AI, computer power, let's not get into the complexity of defining what the power of computers is being defined or evolving into, but how important and how excited are you in entering an era where discovery can or could be just around the corner on these maybe solutions that before were too hard to address?
Well, I think this sort of genomic sequencing and what AI can do there in terms of the bioregenerative aspects of life, and identify these things that they say would take a PhD student an entire PhD to accomplish, like one sequencing. If they can do this very rapidly and quickly, I think this is a great benefit to us. I don't know when AI will know what to do with that material. I think it's sort of, to me, going back to like this idea of intuition, when Schmidt on the Apollo 17, was a geologist. They first sent a scientist on the last Apollo mission. He was one of the last people to step foot on the moon. And I believe the sort of the the colloquial is, he said, "Hey, look at that over there. We should go over there and look at those rocks." And I think that that was the sort of pragmatic field study of that a human being through observation can make, that he employed in his techniques of studying planetary geology, as well as knowing how to also the reconnaissance of retrieving those samples. I think that that level of science and that level of intuition was really beneficial in learning it. So I still somehow think that that's the sort of point of human exploration, is that humans can hopefully use it to their advantage in terms of artificial intelligence and these kind of systems, but are going to be one step ahead of it, because I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm romantic, but I think that there's nothing more intelligent than the human brain, and it's a sort of, not to be hierarchical about it, but I think that we have so much capacity. So I see it as a positive. I don't have a problem. I think it's going to be essential that we live with artificial intelligence, because it's going to keep us alive in these extreme environments, and it already does keep us alive on Earth in some way. I think it's going to be increasingly part of our how we live and what keeps us alive, as well as what might become regenerative to make us live happier and healthier lives as well.
Yeah, you touch a point that for me has been kind of a focus in a lot of the interviews that I do, and the narrative that I'm trying to frame is the human species is not a static species that just looks at the world around and just raise their arms up and, oh my God, we're like powerless. We're constantly pushing the boundaries, but at the same time we're shaping it, and we're always trying to obviously build so that we can assure our survival. We always come facing these new challenges, whether it was the invention of fire, it was all these technologies that have redefined our existence. But at the same time that these challenges are increasing in complexity, so is our capacity to deal with them. And ultimately, yes, there are always some bad actors out there trying to take advantage of these new technologies, but there's always a lot more people trying to do the right thing. And I think that AI is going to create new challenges, going to force us to reassess certain realities that we're dealing with. But ultimately, we're going to figure our way forward. Is that something you agree with?
Well, I think it's just like this podcast. Here we are having a global exchange. You've set up a beautiful forum here for people to, hopefully participate and to listen in, with an exchange of a lot of ideas. So, the internet sometimes can be obviously alienating and isolating for people. So I think it's two sides of the same coin on how we're going to approach these things. I as an architect, we're perpetual optimists. So we have to be, because our profession is difficult enough as it is. And now they say, even on 60 Minutes, they said, oh, one of the people that are going to be replaced by AI are architects, are thought people. And I somehow don't think that that's true. We might have to adapt and get ahead of it in some way that hopefully makes our jobs easier, because they're to be an architect is a very difficult, it's a rewarding profession, but it's a very difficult profession in terms of everything, in terms of making a living out of it, and in terms of pursuing your creative goals. But I think that's the challenge is, we're going to lead technology, not let technology lead us. So I think there's a lot of doomsday scenarios, and perhaps because of Yoshiko, my late wife, was Japanese. The Japanese people she always taught me that, Japanese, through her being Japanese, is that they have less problems with this kind of artificial robotic presence, and the humanoid presence in robotics. They have a higher degree of what they call the uncanny valley of acceptance. So I think that's a much more positive approach to have with technology, particularly if it were to take on, you know, human-like forms in that sense. So I think that robonauts are going to be very much part of the pioneering missions that humans either simultaneously go on or follow. I think that makes sense to me. So yeah, I don't have I don't think there's anything we can do to stop it, but I'm also not afraid of it in directing it. I think that's what creative people do. Is we sort of figure out, these are the tools. What can I do with it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Michael, that we lead the technology, even though the technology can be, challenging and sometimes frightening. I mean, obviously, when we invented nuclear energy, it was there was a period of learning with it, and there was some big dangers that arose from it. But ultimately, I also believe that it was a mistake to actually shy away from it, because we ended up going more into fossil fuels. And I have the impression that had we continued trying to master the technology, perhaps our world would be different today, and we would not be so reliable on fossil fuel.
That's what when they interviewed Arthur C. Clarke, and he said, if we didn't have wars, we'd be a lot further along with our, his vision of the future. And I think that, yeah, we do. We get distracted. We let things get in our way that stop us from fully accepting or embracing or celebrating, additionally investigating systems. I mean, you see that with medicinal plants now in the world, and there's kind of a reversal on that, because calling something a weed or calling something dangerous, it's part of nature. I think that's also, kind of the silly things that happen probably because of the bottom line somewhere, that somebody was making money from something, and it served their purpose to make something the choice, or make something illegal as a result of that. So it's a complex part of being human, but I think we need to really kind of move on and keep going, because that's really the momentum. We have the momentum now, and we've got to ride this wave. This is incredible, because we never thought, if you lived through Apollo, you never thought, with the ISS kind of taking us down a little bit, I'm sorry to say, for all that genius that was involved with that and the incredible precedence that it has given us, it sort of took down the public interest in space. And now we've got a new public rise of interest in space. And I think that that's something that, we have to capitalize, the optimism of that, and try to get people into that moonshot by the end of the decade mentality again.
You were talking about the Japanese mindset. So I've always been a big fan of the Japanese mindset. My work is influenced by the Japanese aesthetic. And you were talking about nature, and this is one thing, within the Japanese, the Shinto philosophy, is that nature and humans are not separated, right? There's not these separations that we find often in the Western, the philosophies, where you have good and bad. In the Eastern philosophies, it's much more complex, and each has its purpose. I love, in the Japanese, that the term kitsugi, that the breaking of something actually gives it more value. The wabi-sabi, the imperfection, all these things actually make life more interesting. And then there's a teaching in that, rather than trying to sanitize these environments, because you see them as negative input, rather than trying to redirect that energy. I mean, that's something that you appreciate too.
Well, yes, of course, because part of my inroad into inroad into architecture, space architecture, was through the poetry of W.B. Yeats, an Irish poet of note. And Yeats wrote actually two of the only plays that were accepted as part of the traditional Japanese No theater canon, At the Hawk's Well and The Only Jealousy of Emer, which are performed in Japan as traditional No plays, because the ancient Irish sentiment is exactly the same as Shinto. It's the same of nature gods and these things. So I think that it was perhaps what the Shinto religion held on to and memorialized in Japan to the present day is what a lot of ancient cultures probably shared. And I think that, the intuition is to go back to what is the past is the future, and they exist simultaneously. They exist simultaneously. And I think that's a really interesting philosophy, is that yes, we accept these things, and we are part of nature. We are not superior to nature. We are part of nature. And I think that is something that, we need to get close. We need to get that animism is something that we need to get closer to again. And I think that's in these sort of post-human theory, that we're going to have to live in, more openly particularly with bacteria, because that's going to survive. That's going to outlive us. And that's something that we need in space. It's a biological agent that we need as part of our system, but how do we keep that from also killing us is the question, like good bacteria versus bad bacteria. But again, that's sort of finding harmony, I think, with people's lives in space. And I love that, when we think about the future of space habitats, it really should be in the form of a greenhouse. And I forget that, what is that? I'm having a brain freeze. That major mathematician who said that architecture, the future of space architecture, Freeman Dyson, would be more like a tree. That we need to inhabit a tree, because the tree will produce in space. That's the future of space architecture, is to make to change the DNA of a tree and allow it to live on an asteroid or on a planet, so that it naturally draws from the regolith, from the minerals, and uses the sunlight to basically photophosphorilize the sort of CO2 or whatever, and generate the oxygen in which we live. And I think that's a very important aspect. So we're going to, in the bioregenerative sense, we're going to take nature with us, and we're going to coexist with that nature, because we humans can't live without it. And I think that's a really important part of that. I think that's shared between the wisdom of the ancient Irish and obviously the ancient Japanese, which has come into the present, that they've been lucky to hold on to.
I always say that nature is the foundation, and we're giving it direction, right? We cannot ignore. It's like our parents. You cannot dismiss or ignore the values of our parents, but at the same time, you always want to go further. Like I don't want to be crossing the ocean simply by floating and letting it to the randomness of the wind to carry me across. I want to build something that's going to take that power. I want to be in charge of where I'm going. I don't want the randomness of life to just decide, and to decide what's going to happen. There's a saying in the space community that the only problem that the dinosaurs had is that they didn't have a space program, and I don't want randomness of, again, space decide of what's going to happen to our species. We need to start from the foundation, which is nature, and then take us with us, but then give it directions. And I just want to ask you one question before we get into your 3 words of wisdom, and I want to circle it back with the Japanese mindset, because we're always working within these tension, right? There's not you want to have enough tension so that it supports itself, but not too much that it breaks. And in Japanese, you have this uh, uh, term that is called te no uchi, which is I don't know if you know about it, but it's a perfect sword grip. So it's a sword grip that is strong enough that it can stop a powerful blow, but soft enough, agile enough so that it can move. I guess when you build, you need to work with that mindset, correct?
Well, I would say yes. I think that part of the part of the problem with space architecture to a lot of people. Sorry, it's getting very, perhaps some people are off put by the sterileness of, these kind of antimicrobial, white, clean environments, smooth environments. So I think that, like thinking about it in terms of architecture, and we live in an interior space for the most part, is how do we add texture? How do we control the acoustics? How do we create quality of life? So I think that's sort of like the right grip. Like not too tight, not too loose, and that's a very important attribute to being an architect. Like, how much do you design as an intentional thing that somebody's going to follow, and how much do you create the opportunity for the person that's using it to complete it? So I think that that's the problem that we've seen in recent historical architecture, is that sometimes it's overbearing, sometimes it's too tight, and obviously it can't be too loose. It's not a DIY situation. We are experts at something. We do have thousands of years of precedents that we draw from. We intellectually approach it. So, but I think it's also, so therefore it cannot be too loose. So it requires a balance that allows somebody to have the confidence to put something forward, but to allow somebody else to complete it is a very important invitation. And I think that goes back to collaboration. We're not only collaborating with all the experts that are required to get there and do it and be safe, but we're collaborating with the end user. And that's a really important gift. And I think that, when I teach, teaching is really a gift that I'm sharing in collaboration with my students. It's a dialogue that's established. So I think that in any case, I would say that, yeah, that's the right spot to try to find. And it's not easy to know where that is. You'll know it when you get there. You'll know it when you're in the, as you say, in the Zen moment. When you're in the moment, you know that you were present, had the presence of mind to hold the sword in the correct way. And I think that that's a kind of mind, again, that goes back to that haptic and cerebral interface that is intuition.
Because ultimately, I think that we need to build with the desire for things to be resilient. Like we don't always know the unexpected, the unknown. We have to assume that there are things that are going to happen that we haven't predicted. So therefore, our buildings or our design have to not be so confined to a box. They have to be able to kind of adapt and move with the with time and with these new environments. Now, Michael, you have a long career of evolving, adapting, creating, pushing into the unknowns, mentoring. You have a group of people, and now you're shaping the future. Where we're going to be living. As a human being, and as an entrepreneur, and as a boss, what would be your 3 words of wisdom?
That's even harder, because I hadn't pre-thought that, even though you might have mentioned it, that might be a question. I don't know. I would just simply say, maybe it would have to be our ability to think. So I think ability to think would be my 3 words of wisdom, because I think that that's what's going to allow humans to live beyond the lifetime of planets. Like, I think that that's is our ability to think, and that thinking process is key. So yeah, that's how do we create the space for people to think? How do we create the equitable space for all people to think and to participate? Yeah, it's to think outside the box and really just to think.
I mean, it is something that I do believe separates us from nature is our capacity to think of the abstract and to go beyond. And I don't believe that, I mean, yes, there are certain species perhaps who have a capacity to think, but no one is thinking about the future in the same way that we do. And if we can incentivize critical thinking and people's capacity to think together, collaborative and not polarizing thinking, but collaborative thinking. I definitely believe like this is where we're going. And just the idea of having a future, we're gonna have, billions of people who wake up in the morning with the desire to think of solutions. That for me is an exciting future. Michael, you're
right.
Future.
But I would say one more thing, that our architects, we don't want to also just be problem solving. We have to be problematizers. So I think that the ability to think is to push thought forward in a way that is not resolvable necessarily, but teases out, a lot of other spin-off sort of thoughts and processing. So yeah, I think that most architects, they literally kind of knock their head off the concrete if they're just ending up with problem solving tasks. But through problematizing, I think that we can find new solutions that are not necessarily direct linear processes that are engaged with contemporary, maybe how engineering used to be something that was more inventive. It's become, a little bit more linear, perhaps, in its problem solving, and that serves its purpose. But I do think that that thinking is going to have to allow us to also be, leaders of questions. That asking the right questions is perhaps more important than finding the right answers.
Michael, it was a pleasure having this conversation with you. We're going to make sure that all the links, either to your LinkedIn profile, to your company, and some of the projects that you're working on are all accessible within this interview. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I look forward for a path to cross in real life so that we can continue this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.